For almost 30 years now, the main way for any video game console to transfer sound data is by programming the physical copy of the game to have sound effects and music, and letting the console read that data. For digital copies of games, on consoles like the Switch or PC, audio capabilities have seemingly no restrictions except for how much storage the game can take up. But how was it done before? For the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, which came out in late 1990, a sound chip is located in the console's motherboard. Today, consoles like the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X use modern capabilities like solid-state drives to make audio smooth, clear, and even pre-compressed to save storage. Even after compression, certain modern music tracks can be as large as 3 megabytes, which is almost 50 times as large as the original 64 kilobytes on the SNES. But how did video game audio progress so fast? And how was audio handled back before we had what we do today? Just to be clear, this is a summary video for the console's sound system. For a more in-depth look on how this process works, please check out Retro Game Mechanics Explained. The channel has a full playlist of explanation videos, and if you leave this video with any questions about the SNES hardware, their videos will probably answer them. With that out of the way, we need to understand how audio storage worked on consoles and how it has changed. Thankfully, this is one of the few aspects that hasn't changed much over time. For most games, code is read when the game loads a new area, loading in both the physical view and the audible elements. Brandon Young, in his 2014 interview conducted by Lily Moyeri from emusician.com, says that video game music can be non-linear. This makes the musician's job very unique, with video games being the only medium that has non-linear musical opportunities. For older games, this can mean the theme for the level. For newer games, this could mean music, sound effects, or ambience like wind or nature. So, in reality, the Super Nintendo's 64 kilobytes is only a restriction per area of the game. For example, if you're playing A Link to the Past, the game will load in the sound effects for your sword swinging and getting hit, in addition to the background music. As mentioned in Karen Cook's 2023 research article for the Society of Music Theory, titled 8-Bit Affordances, Jun Chikuma's Soundtrack to Faxanadu, sound effects are able to manipulate the background music. Since early consoles have limited audio channels, short audio clips like jumping, taking damage, and enemy noises would overwrite musical information, which would be muted briefly to let the sound effects play. So that means that all the game has to load in is a few very brief sound effects and one song. How come it still sounds so computery and chiptune-y? The answer lies in the individual samples, not samples like Curtis Mayfield on Kanye West. The day I die. Or The Clash on MIA. Samples in this case mean waveforms created digitally to sound like real sounds, such as someone using hexadecimal code to add different frequencies together to create a waveform that sounds like a cat. This process can be simple for some composers, who have pre-made samples shared to them by other collaborating artists. But it can also be grueling for others who want to push the system past its basics and truly stretch that 64 kilobytes of storage. While not much is known about how the composers uploaded the music and sound effects, we do know that the process was done primarily through hexadecimal code, which is a base 16 number language where you count up from 0 through 9, then A through F. The reason hexadecimal code has specifically 16 characters that it can read from is so that the program can organize bits into bytes. Making hexadecimal code a multiple of 8 is the important step here. Now, hexadecimal code wasn't just responsible for playing a single frequency, like a 261.6 Hz waveform when a C4 note is desired. The code reading process on the Super Nintendo had many other capabilities. There were separate areas where you could adjust the amplitude, the direction that the sound is panned, and even add various preset effects, such as reverb, delay, and chorus. When you take all of that and multiply it by the 8 music tracks offered on the console, and add in all the necessary sound effects, it is obvious why 16 kilobytes was a limiting amount of sound storage. As mentioned earlier, there were composers on this console who knew that it was capable of better sound. Here's an example of how the SSMP sound chip was pushed to its limits. The Korg Wavestation was a keyboard that came out in 1990. The Player's Guide, written by Stanley Junglieb in 2015, goes into detail about the selling point of the Wavestation, a unique and new feature called wave sequencing. Wave sequencing took teeny tiny samples, usually just 1 or 2 waveforms, and would crossfade them into other waveforms. This allows you to keep the individual note properties of a wave sequence, but let you create incredibly precise musical movements if used well. David Wise, the music composer for Donkey Kong Country, mentions in his interview conducted by Christopher Greening from SquareEnixMusic.com in 2010 that he realized that wave sequencing was a music production technique that could be used anywhere digitally if given the correct resources. It just so happened that the SSMP was capable of doing so. Individual waveforms? Check. Volume control for crossfading? Check. Multiple channels for different instruments? Check. A musical genius who was able to pioneer electronic music techniques before they were common? Check. The Donkey Kong Country soundtrack is widely considered the greatest video game soundtrack on the Super Nintendo, and for good reason. When I conducted a small survey featuring 10 popular Super Nintendo songs, 23 people answered. Out of them, 16 thought that this song, Aquatic Ambience from Donkey Kong Country, was the best. Forget how well it matches the environment of the level that it's in. Forget that it took 5 weeks for David Wise to get it to sound like this. Just the fact that music like this was possible with only 64 kilobytes of sample storage is an amazing feat. Most audio programs nowadays come with features which are capable of creating sweeping synth chords and deep, beautiful background melodies that resonate like the motion of a moving tide. It's become something of a luxury, and we take for granted just how easy it is nowadays to create sounds which were almost impossible to emulate on the older video game consoles. Maybe in 30 years, future composers will look back at our current technology and breathe a sigh of relief, grateful for the tools at their disposal.